What if I told you that one of the most beloved characters in all of anime was forged through a series of tragedies so devastating that they nearly destroyed him completely? What if the teacher, who became known for his wisdom about friendship and loyalty, had once been so consumed by duty that he would have sacrificed anyone to complete a mission? The story of Kakashi Hatake isn't just another tale of a skilled ninja rising through the ranks. It's a masterclass in how trauma can either break a person completely or transform them into something extraordinary. Today we're diving deep into the complete life story of the copy ninja himself, Kakashi Hatake. From a child prodigy to becoming the Sixth Hokage, Kakashi's journey is filled with more heartbreak, redemption, and character growth than most entire anime series combined. By the time we're done, you'll understand why Kakashi's story resonates with millions of fans worldwide and why his famous words about abandoning friends carry so much weight. But here's what makes his story truly incredible. Every lesson Kakashi learned, every piece of wisdom he shared, every moment of growth he experienced came at the cost of unimaginable personal loss. The man who taught Naruto, Sasuke, and Sakura about the power of bonds had to lose everything he cared about first to understand what truly mattered. This isn't just a character analysis, this is the story of how someone can rise from the ashes of their worst failures to become a legend. Let's start at the very beginning, because understanding Kakashi's childhood is crucial to understanding everything that comes after. Kakashi Hatake was born on September 15th in the Hidden Leaf Village, and from the moment he could walk, it was clear that he was destined for greatness. But not the kind of greatness you might expect. His father was Sakura Hatake, better known throughout the ninja world as the White Fang of Konoha. Now, when I say Sakura was legendary, I'm not exaggerating. His skill and reputation were so remarkable that they were said to rival those of the legendary Sannin. That's the kind of shadow young Kakashi grew up in. From an impossibly early age, Kakashi showed that he had inherited more than just his father's looks. At age 5, while other kids were still learning basic reading and writing, Kakashi graduated from the Ninja Academy at the top of his class. 5 years old. Most kids at that age are still afraid of the dark, and Kakashi was already a legitimate ninja, but he wasn't done impressing people. Just 1 year later, at the tender age of 6, he became a Chunin. To put this in perspective, most talented ninja don't reach Chunin rank until their mid-teens, if ever. But here's where the story takes its first dark turn, and it's a doozy. Despite all his incredible achievements and his father's legendary status, tragedy was already lurking around the corner. Kakashi's mother had died when he was very young, leaving just him and his father. This created an incredibly close bond between the two, with young Kakashi idolizing his dad and desperately wanting to follow in his footsteps. The problem was, Sakumo's philosophy about being a ninja was about to clash catastrophically with the harsh realities of their world. During a crucial mission, Sakura faced an impossible choice that would define not only his own fate, but his son's entire worldview. He had to choose between completing the mission and leaving his comrades behind, or abandoning the mission to save them and facing the consequences. For Sakura, there was no real choice at all. He valued the lives of his teammates over any mission parameters, no matter how important. He chose to save his squad. This decision, while morally correct, led to devastating consequences for the village. The mission's failure caused significant damage to Konoha's interests, and the village leadership was not forgiving. What happened next was a masterclass in how quickly public opinion can turn against someone. The same villagers who had once celebrated the White Fang as a hero now turned on him with vicious intensity. He became a figure of public ridicule and hatred, scorned by the very people he had spent his life protecting. The psychological toll this took on Sakura was immense. Here was a man who had dedicated his entire life to serving his village, only to be cast aside the moment he chose human compassion over cold duty. The depression that followed was overwhelming, and despite having a young son who needed him, Sakura made the ultimate tragic decision. He took his own life, leaving young Kakashi completely alone in the world. Now, imagine being a 6-year-old kid and watching your hero, your father, your entire world crumble under the weight of public shame, and then disappear forever. This wasn't just losing a parent. This was watching the person you most admired be destroyed by the very system you were training to serve. The impact on Kakashi's psyche was immediate and profound. But here's where things get really interesting from a psychological perspective. Instead of rejecting the ninja system that had led to his father's downfall, Kakashi came to believe that his father's choice, though honorable, had been a mistake. In Kakashi's traumatized young mind, the solution wasn't to prioritize human connections over duty. The solution he adopted was to prioritize duty above all, including personal attachments, in order to prevent the same mistakes his father made. This decision fundamentally altered who Kakashi was as a person. The warm idealistic child who had looked up to his father's compassion transformed into something much colder and more calculating. He embraced a philosophy that missions must always come first, that emotions were a weakness, and that personal attachments were dangerous liabilities that could compromise a ninja's effectiveness. By age 13, Kakashi had achieved something that should have been impossible. He became a Jonin, the highest regular rank a ninja can achieve. 13 years old. This wasn't just unprecedented, it was almost unthinkable. Here was a teenager who had already surpassed most adult ninja in skill and responsibility, but at what cost? His rapid advancement came at the expense of normal childhood experiences, emotional development, and the ability to form meaningful relationships with his peers. His reputation during this period was complex. On one hand, he was universally recognized as a prodigious talent whose abilities far exceeded his age. On the other hand, he was known for being emotionally distant, ruthlessly focused on mission completion, and seemingly incapable of the kind of bonds that made teams truly effective. He had become everything his father wasn't, and in doing so, he had lost much of what made his father great. And this brings us to one of the most important relationships in Kakashi life, his assignment to Team Minato. When Kakashi was placed under the leadership of Minato Namikaze, the future 4th Hokage, alongside teammates Obito Uchiha and Rin Nohara, it set the stage for the most transformative period of his young life. This wasn't just another team assignment. This was the universe giving Kakashi one more chance to learn the lessons his trauma had prevented him from understanding. The dynamics within Team Minato were fascinating and complex. You had Minato, who represented everything a leader should be. Patient, wise, and deeply committed to the growth of his students. Then you had Kakashi, the prodigy who had achieved incredible success but at the cost of his humanity. Obito, despite being the same age as Kakashi, was still struggling with basic ninja skills and hadn't even awakened his Sharingan yet. And finally Rin, who served as the team's medical specialist and often found herself mediating between her two very different male teammates. The tension between Kakashi and Obito is immediate and intense. Here was Kakashi, who had already achieved Jonin rank and was leading missions, paired with Obito, who was still making basic mistakes and seemed more concerned with helping old ladies find their cats than becoming a skilled warrior. From Kakashi's perspective, Obito represented everything that was wrong with the ninja system. He was emotional, he prioritized feelings over logic, and he seemed to care more about protecting people than completing objectives. But Obito saw something in Kakashi that Kakashi couldn't see in himself. He saw the pain behind the cold exterior, the loneliness that came from isolating himself from meaningful connections, and the way that Kakashi's rigid adherence to rules was really just a defense mechanism against further loss. Obito's criticism of Kakashi wasn't just about tactical disagreements, it was about fundamental questions of what it meant to be human in a world that often demanded inhuman choices. Under Minato's patient guidance, these three young ninja began to learn lessons about teamwork, sacrifice, and the true meaning of strength that would echo throughout their lives and the lives of the next generation. But the most important lessons were still to come, and they would be paid for with a price that none of them could have imagined. The stage was being set for the events that would define not just Kakashi's character, but the entire trajectory of the Naruto series. The Third Great Ninja War was raging, and Team Minato was about to face their greatest challenge yet, a mission that would test everything they believed about duty, friendship, and the cost of being a ninja in a world where the stakes were always life and death. What happened next profoundly impacted Kakashi's worldview, beginning the long and painful journey of self-discovery and growth that would eventually lead him to become one of the most respected teachers in ninja history. But that transformation would come at a cost so devastating that it would take decades for Kakashi to fully process what he had lost and what he had learned. The Third Great Ninja War arrived like a storm that nobody was truly prepared for, and it would become the crucible in which Kakashi's entire worldview would be tested, shattered, and ultimately reborn. This wasn't just another conflict between villages, this was the kind of war that would define an entire generation of ninja, and for Team Minato, it represented their transition from training exercises to life and death missions, where mistakes weren't just failures, they were fatal. The mission that would change everything seemed straightforward enough on paper. Team Minato was assigned to destroy the Kanabi Bridge in Kusegakure, a strategic target that would cut off Iwagakure's supply lines and significantly impact their war effort. For most teams, this would have been a challenging but manageable objective, but there was a complication that made this mission far more significant than anyone realized at the time. Minato was needed on the front lines, fighting battles that required his unique abilities and leadership. This meant that for the first time, Kakashi would be leading a mission as the team's commanding officer. At just 13 years old, he was being entrusted with the lives of his teammates and the success of a crucial military operation. The weight of this responsibility was immense, but Kakashi approached it with the same cold professionalism that had defined his entire ninja career. Before they departed, there was a moment that captured the dynamics within the team. Minato acknowledged Kakashi's recent promotion to Jonin, but the team's interactions focused more on the mission ahead and their roles within it, acknowledging the incredible achievement of someone so young reaching such an elite rank. But Obito, in his usual carefree manner, didn't seem concerned with the formalities, focusing more on the mission ahead than any personal gestures. This wasn't malicious neglect. Obito's mind was simply focused on different priorities than material gestures or formal recognitions of rank. The mission began with the kind of tension that had always existed between Kakashi and Obito, but now the stakes were exponentially higher. Every decision Kakashi made could mean the difference between mission success and failure, between his teammates returning home safely or not returning at all. The pressure was enormous, but Kakashi handled it the only way he knew how. He prioritized the mission above everything else, including the personal feelings and concerns of his teammates. This approach created immediate friction with Obito, who couldn't understand how Kakashi could be so seemingly indifferent to the human cost of their actions. From Obito's perspective, they weren't just soldiers carrying out orders, they were people with lives, dreams, and connections that mattered more than any military objective. But Kakashi had been shaped by trauma to believe the exact opposite. In his mind, allowing personal emotions to influence tactical decisions was the kind of weakness that had destroyed his father. The mission took a catastrophic turn when Rin was captured by Iwagakure forces during their infiltration. This was exactly the kind of scenario that revealed the fundamental difference between Kakashi and Obito in approaches to being a ninja. For Kakashi, the logical response was clear. They should continue with the mission and deal with Rin's capture after completing their primary objective. The bridge was their target, and personal concerns couldn't be allowed to compromise that goal. But for Obito, this wasn't a tactical decision. This was a moral crisis that cut to the very heart of what it meant to care about another person. Rin wasn't just a teammate or a strategic asset. She was someone he cared deeply about, someone whose life had value that transcended any mission parameters. The idea of abandoning her to complete an objective was not just strategically questionable, it was morally unacceptable. The argument that followed between Kakashi and Obito wasn't really about tactics or mission protocols. It was about two fundamentally different philosophies of what mattered most in life. Kakashi, scarred by watching his father's compassion lead to his destruction, argued that missions must always take priority. Obito, driven by an innate understanding of human connection, argued that protecting the people you care about is the only thing that truly matters. When Kakashi refused to prioritize Rin's rescue, Obito made a decision that perfectly captured who he was as a person. He left on his own, determined to save his teammate regardless of the consequences. But before he left, Obito said something to Kakashi that would haunt him for years. He told Kakashi that he had failed as a friend by prioritizing the mission over their teammates. This statement hit Kakashi like a physical blow because it directly challenged everything he had built his identity around. Here was Obito, someone Kakashi had always considered inferior as a ninja, calling into question the very principles that Kakashi believed made him strong. The accusation forced Kakashi to confront the possibility that his approach to being a ninja wasn't strength at all, but a form of cowardice disguised as duty. What happened next would haunt Kakashi for the rest of his life. Obito located the cave where Rin was being held, but he was discovered by an enemy ninja before he could mount a rescue. The situation was desperate, and it looked like Obito's emotional decision to prioritize his teammate over the mission was going to get him killed. But then something extraordinary happened. Kakashi arrived. Despite his earlier insistence on mission priority, despite his cold calculation about the relative importance of objectives versus personal attachments, Kakashi had followed Obito. He had chosen to abandon the mission in favor of saving his teammates. It was the exact same choice his father had made years earlier, the choice that Kakashi had spent his entire young life rejecting. But Kakashi. Change of heart came at a terrible cost. During the rescue attempt, he lost his left eye to an enemy attack. The injury was severe and permanently disfiguring, a physical reminder of the price of caring about other people. Yet, despite the pain and the tactical disadvantage of losing half his vision, Kakashi continued fighting alongside Obito to save Rin. This was when Obito finally awakened his Sharingan, triggered by his desperate desire to help Kakashi and protect their teammate. The irony was perfect and tragic. Obito, who had always been dismissed as the weak link in their team, gained his clan's legendary power at the exact moment when he was fighting to save the person who had always looked down on him. Together, Kakashi and Obito successfully infiltrated the cave and freed Rin from her captors. For a brief shining moment, it seemed like their teamwork had overcome the odds. They had saved their teammate, and despite their philosophical differences, they had proven that they could work together effectively when it mattered most. But their escape was about to become a nightmare that would define the rest of their lives. As they fled the cave, their enemy triggered a collapse that brought tons of rock crashing down around them. In the chaos and confusion, disaster struck with cruel precision. A massive boulder, too large and moving too fast to avoid, came crashing toward Kakashi. He was directly in its path and there was no time to escape. Obito saw what was happening and made a split-second decision that captured everything noble and selfless about his character. He pushed Kakashi out of the way, taking the full impact of the boulder himself. The right side of his body was completely crushed, pinned beneath tons of rock with no possibility of escape. His injuries were so severe that death was inevitable, but he was still conscious and aware of what had happened. In those final moments, Obito made a request that would change Kakashi's life forever. As a dying gift, he asked Rin to transplant his newly awakened Sharingan into Kakashi's damaged eye socket. It was an incredibly generous gesture from someone who had every reason to be bitter about how Kakashi had treated him. Instead of anger or resentment, Obito's final act was one of friendship and forgiveness. The transplant was successful, and Kakashi suddenly found himself with one of the most powerful abilities in the ninja world. The Sharingan didn't just restore his lost vision, it granted him incredible new powers, including the ability to copy any technique he saw and predict his opponent's movements with supernatural precision. But this gift came with an emotional weight that was almost unbearable. With his new Sharingan, Kakashi was able to defeat their remaining enemies and complete the mission. But as he and Rin escaped the collapsing cave, they were forced to leave Obito's body behind. The teammate who had challenged Kakashi's worldview, who had shown him the importance of caring about others, who had ultimately saved his life, was gone forever. Or so Kakashi thought. The trauma of losing Obito was devastating, but Kakashi barely had time to process this loss before an even more horrific tragedy struck. During another mission, with Minato once again absent and Kakashi leading the team, Rin was captured by Kirigakure forces. But this wasn't just a standard kidnapping. The enemy had made Rin the Jinchuriki of the Three Tails, setting up a trap that could have catastrophic consequences for Konoha. Unknown to Kakashi, the Hidden Mist Village had made Rin the Jinchuriki of the Three Tails, one of the most powerful tailed beasts in existence. But this wasn't done to make her stronger or to give her new abilities. It was a trap of the most cruel and calculated kind. The plan was for Rin to be inevitably rescued by her teammates, return to Konoha, and then lose control of the beast within the village, causing massive destruction and casualties. When Kakashi finally tracked down and rescued Rin, she immediately tried to explain the situation to him. She begged him to kill her before they could return to the village, understanding that her survival meant the potential destruction of everything they had sworn to protect. It was an impossible request that put Kakashi in a position where any choice he made would result in tragedy. Kakashi refused to kill his teammate, instead focusing on fighting off the pursuing Kirigakure forces while trying to find another solution. His loyalty to Rin and his determination to save her reflected how much Obito's sacrifice had changed his perspective on what mattered most. He was no longer the cold, mission-focused ninja who would sacrifice anyone for tactical advantage. But sometimes, personal growth comes too late to prevent tragedy. In the heat of battle, as Kakashi prepared to strike down an enemy ninja with his signature lightning blade technique, Rin made a decision that would haunt Kakashi for decades. She deliberately threw herself into the path of his attack, using his own jutsu to end her life and prevent the destruction of their village. The sight of his teammates' blood on his hands, the knowledge that he had been the instrument of her death even though she had chosen it, shattered something fundamental in Kakashi's psyche. In that moment, both his Sharingan and Rin's evolved into the Mangekyo Sharingan, a transformation that only occurs in response to the most intense emotional trauma. Kakashi had now lost both of his teammates in the most traumatic ways possible. Obito had died saving him, and Rin had died by his own hand, even though both deaths were the result of impossible circumstances beyond his control. The guilt, the survivor's remorse, and the sheer weight of these losses sent Kakashi spiraling into a depression so deep that it fundamentally altered his personality and his relationship with the world around him. The village's reaction to these events made everything worse. Many people, especially those in Anbu, believed that Kakashi had deliberately killed Rin to prevent information leaks or for some other tactical reason. He gained the nickname Friend Killer Kakashi, a reputation that followed him like a shadow and prevented him from forming new, meaningful relationships. At night, Kakashi was haunted by dreams where he killed Rin again and again, reliving the worst moment of his life in endless repetition. During the day, he avoided his former friends and classmates. Unable to bear their presence or their questions about what had happened, he had become completely isolated, trapped in a cycle of guilt and self-recrimination that seemed to have no escape. This was when Minato, now the fourth Hokage, made a decision that he hoped would help his former student heal from the trauma that was consuming him. He assigned Kakashi to the ANBU Black Ops, an elite organization that operated in the shadows and handled the village's most sensitive and dangerous missions. The logic was that being around other highly skilled ninja who understood the costs of their profession might help Kakashi process his grief. But instead of healing, Kakashi time in ANBU may have actually prolonged his emotional stagnation. The organization's culture of secrecy, emotional detachment, and ruthless efficiency was perfectly suited to someone who wanted to avoid dealing with personal trauma. Kakashi excelled in this environment, eventually becoming a captain and leading his own team. But his professional success came at the cost of his emotional development. Kakashi years in Anbu became a masterclass in compartmentalization, where he learned to bury his emotions so deeply that he could function as an elite operative while remaining completely disconnected from his own humanity. He developed a reputation for clinical efficiency and unwavering dedication to mission completion, but those who worked closely with him could see the hollow look in his eyes that never quite went away. The same trauma that had once made him question everything about duty and friendship now drove him to embrace the darkest aspects of ninja work as a way of avoiding the pain that came with caring about anyone. During this period, Kakashi became involved in some of the most morally complex operations the village had ever undertaken. He worked alongside other damaged souls who had found refuge in the shadows, including a young man named Tenzo, who would later become known as Yamato. Their partnership was built on mutual understanding of what it meant to have lost everything that mattered, and together they carried out missions that would have broken lesser ninja. But even as Kakashi's skills reached new heights and his reputation as an elite operative grew, the fundamental wound in his soul remained unhealed. The irony of Kakashi's situation during his ANBU years was that he had become exactly what his younger self had always claimed to want. He was the perfect ninja, someone who could complete any mission regardless of the personal cost, who never let emotions interfere with tactical decisions, and who treated his own life and the lives of others as expendable resources in service of larger objectives. But achieving this supposed ideal had left him feeling more empty and disconnected than ever before. Everything changed on October 10th when the Nine Tails attacked the village in an event that would reshape the entire ninja world. Kakashi and many of Konoha's other young ninja were prevented from participating in the defense of their home, instead being confined within protective barriers while their leaders fought and died to save them. For someone who had dedicated his life to protecting others, being forced to remain on the sidelines while his sensei sacrificed his life was another devastating blow to his sense of purpose and identity. The death of Minato and Kushina during the Nine Tails attack represented the final severing of Kakashi's connection to his past. Minato hadn't just been his teacher or his commanding officer. He had been the closest thing to a father figure that Kakashi had known since Sakumo's suicide, and his loss completed Kakashi's isolation from anything resembling a normal human connection. With Rin dead, Obito reportedly sharing the same fate, and now Minato gone as well, Kakashi was truly alone in the world with nothing but his missions and his guilt for company. But sometimes the most profound transformations happen slowly, almost imperceptibly, as the accumulation of small moments gradually shifts our understanding of what matters most. Kakashi's journey back to humanity didn't begin with a dramatic revelation or a single life-changing event. Instead, it started with the gradual recognition that the path he had chosen wasn't leading him toward strength or peace, but toward a kind of spiritual death that was perhaps worse than physical destruction. The third Hokage, recognizing the toll Kakashi's past had taken on him, assigned him to Team 7, hoping that mentoring the next generation would help Kakashi find a new sense of purpose. Instead of the purely destructive missions that had defined his ANBU career, Kakashi found himself increasingly involved in operations that required him to work with other people, to consider the broader implications of his actions, and to remember that the village he served was made up of real people with real lives that mattered. Slowly, almost reluctantly, Kakashi began to reconnect with the values that Obito and Minato had tried to teach him. It wasn't a sudden conversion or a dramatic moment of clarity. It was more like watching someone gradually emerge from a long dark tunnel into daylight, blinking and uncertain, but finally able to see clearly again. The process was painful because it meant confronting all the grief and trauma he had spent years avoiding, but it was also necessary if he was ever going to become whole again. The transition from his ANBU role to becoming a Jonin instructor represented more than just a career change. It was a conscious choice to invest in the future rather than remaining trapped in the past, to honor the memory of his fallen teammates by passing on the lessons he had learned through such tremendous personal cost. When Kakashi accepted the responsibility of training the next generation of ninja, he was essentially committing to a form of emotional resurrection that would be just as challenging as any mission he had ever undertaken. His assignment to Team 7 wasn't random or coincidental. The third Hokage had specifically chosen him to lead Naruto Uzumaki, Sasuke Uchiha, and Sakura Haruno because he recognized that these three students needed someone who understood what it meant to lose everything and somehow find a way to keep going. More importantly, he understood that Kakashi needed these students just as much as they needed him, because the act of teaching them would force him to confront and articulate the lessons he had learned through his own suffering. The parallels between Team 7 and his old team Minato were immediately apparent to anyone who looked closely enough. Naruto's determination and loyalty reflected Obito's spirit in ways that were both inspiring and heartbreaking. Sasuke's prodigious abilities combined with his emotional distance mirrored Kakashi's own youth, creating an opportunity for him to guide someone away from the same destructive path he had walked. And Sakura's intelligence and developing medical skills echoed aspects of Rin, giving Kakashi a chance to protect and nurture someone who reminded him of his lost teammate. The famous bell test that Kakashi administered to his new students was a direct manifestation of everything he had learned about the importance of teamwork and putting teammates above personal glory or rigid adherence to rules. When he told them that ninja who abandon their friends are worse than scum, he wasn't just reciting a philosophy he had read somewhere. He was sharing the most important lesson of his entire life, bought and paid for with the blood of people he had loved and lost. Watching his students struggle with the same fundamental questions about duty versus compassion that had once torn him apart was both therapeutic and terrifying for Kakashi. He could see them making the same mistakes he had made, falling into the same traps that had nearly destroyed him, and he was determined to guide them toward a better understanding of what it meant to be both a ninja and a human being. But he also knew that some lessons can only be learned through personal experience, no matter how much a teacher might want to spare their students that pain. The Land of Waves mission became Kakashi's first major test as a leader in a real combat situation with his new team, and it showcased not only his considerable abilities, but also the protective instincts that had slowly begun to replace the cold calculation that had once defined him. Facing Zabuza and Haku forced Kakashi to confront questions about the nature of loyalty, sacrifice, and what it means to live and die for something greater than yourself. These were the same themes that had dominated his own tragic past, but now he was experiencing them from the perspective of someone trying to protect others rather than simply survive. The mission's conclusion, where Kakashi respectfully buried the bodies of his former enemies, demonstrated the compassion and honor that had grown within him since his darkest days in Anbu. This act of respect for fallen opponents showed his students the importance of maintaining one's humanity even in the midst of conflict, a lesson that would prove crucial for their future development and his own continued healing. As Team 7 continued to take on increasingly challenging missions and face more dangerous opponents, Kakashi found himself genuinely invested in their growth and development in ways he hadn't experienced since his time with Obito and Rin. Unlike his earlier years when he had avoided emotional attachments at all costs, Kakashi began to genuinely care about his students' well-being and development, both as ninja and as people. This represented a complete transformation from his earlier detached approach to relationships and showed that he had successfully internalized the lessons about the importance of bonds that his fallen teammates had tried to teach him. But the true test of Kakashi transformation was still to come. The revelation that Sasuke was following a path remarkably similar to his own younger self, prioritizing power and revenge over human connections, forced Kakashi to confront the possibility that his guidance might not be enough to save someone he had come to view as a surrogate son. When SAS ultimately chose to leave the village in pursuit of strength from Orochimaru, Kakashi experienced a form of failure that was different from, but no less painful, than the losses he had suffered in his youth. The difference this time was that Kakashi didn't retreat into isolation or blame himself exclusively for what had happened. Instead, he channeled his pain into a determination to continue supporting his remaining students and to be ready to help Seisei when the opportunity arose. This represented a fundamental shift in how he processed loss and disappointment, showing that he had finally learned to balance personal responsibility with an understanding that some outcomes are beyond any individual's control. During the time skip between Part 1 and Part 2 of the series, Kakashi continued his work as a Junin instructor while also taking on increasingly important responsibilities within the village's leadership structure. His reputation had evolved from that of a coldly efficient operative to someone known for his wisdom, compassion, and unwavering commitment to protecting the next generation. The transformation was so complete that many younger ninja who knew him only by reputation had difficulty believing stories about his harsh and emotionally distant past. The return of Team 7 after their individual training periods brought new challenges and opportunities for Kakashi to demonstrate how much he had changed. Naruto's growth into a powerful and confident young man, Sakura's development into a skilled medical ninja and formidable warrior, and even Seisei's continued journey down a dark path all reflected different aspects of Kakashi, own experiences, and gave him chances to apply the wisdom he had gained through decades of loss and learning. But perhaps the most significant test of Kakashi character development came with the revelation that his former teammate Obito was alive and had become one of the greatest threats the ninja world had ever faced. Learning that the person whose death had shaped so much of his worldview had not only survived but had been driven by that same trauma, to embrace a philosophy of despair and destruction created one of the most emotionally complex situations Kakashi had ever confronted. The knowledge that Obito had witnessed Rin's death and had spent years blaming Kakashi for it added layers of guilt and complexity to an already traumatic situation. But instead of collapsing under this revelation as he might have in his younger years, Kakashi found the strength to face his former friend with both determination to stop his destructive plans and compassion for the pain that had driven him to such extremes. The confrontation between Kakashi and Obito during the Fourth Great Ninja War represented the culmination of decades of unresolved trauma, guilt, and complex emotions that had shaped both of their lives in profound ways. When Kakashi finally came face to face with his former teammate on the battlefield, he wasn't just fighting an enemy of incredible power and strategic importance. He was confronting the living embodiment of his own greatest failure and the path he himself might have taken if circumstances had been slightly different. The irony of their situation was almost too painful to bear. Here was Obito, the teammate who had once criticized Kakashi for being too cold and mission-focused, now advocating for a plan that would strip away everyone's individual agency and trap them in an artificial dream world. Meanwhile, Kakashi, who had once been willing to abandon his friends for the sake of duty, was now fighting desperately to preserve the messy, painful, but ultimately meaningful reality of human connection and choice. Their battles weren't just physical confrontations between two incredibly skilled ninja. They were philosophical debates conducted with kunai and jutsu, each trying to prove that their understanding of what mattered most in life was correct. Obito argued that a world without pain, loss, or the possibility of betrayal was preferable to the cruel reality they had both experienced. Kakashi, drawing on decades of slowly learned wisdom, maintained that the capacity for both joy and suffering was what made life worth living. The psychological complexity of fighting someone who had once saved his life, someone whose ideals he had once admired, someone whose current path was a direct result of trauma Kakashi felt responsible for, created an internal conflict that was almost unbearable. Every technique Obito, every strategy he employed, reminded Kakashi of the friend he had once known. But every destructive act, every callous dismissal of human life, so at your things showed how completely that friend had been consumed by despair. During their confrontations, Kakashi was forced to relive not just the trauma of losing Obito and Rin, but also the slow, painful process of learning to live with that loss. Every memory they shared became a weapon in their philosophical war, with Obito seeing their past suffering to justify his present actions, and Kakashi drawing on the same experiences to explain why that suffering had meaning and purpose. The revelation that Obito had orchestrated many of the events that led to Rin's death added another devastating layer to their conflict. Learning that his friend's apparent demise had been staged, that Madara Uchiha had manipulated events to ensure Obito would witness Rin's death at the worst possible moment, forced Kakashi to reconsider everything he thought he understood about their shared tragedy. The knowledge that Obito transformation hadn't been a natural result of grief, but a carefully orchestrated manipulation by someone seeking to exploit their pain, made the entire situation even more heartbreaking. But perhaps the most remarkable aspect of Kakashi's response to these revelations was how it demonstrated his emotional growth over the decades since their original trauma. Instead of being consumed by rage at the manipulation they had both suffered, or being paralyzed by additional guilt over his role in events he hadn't fully understood, Kakashi found the strength to feel compassion for his former friend while still opposing his destructive plans. This balance between empathy and responsibility represented the culmination of everything Kakashi had learned about leadership, friendship, and what it meant to protect the people and values you care about. He could understand why Obito had made the choices he had made without excusing the consequences of those choices. He could feel genuine sorrow for his friend's pain while still fighting with everything he had to prevent that pain from being inflicted on others.